Josh is on the line. Josh Paunil, PhillyMag.com. He's looking at the All 22, which is one of my favorite segments of the week, one of the best reads on the internet when you're looking for Eagles coverage. PhillyMag.com, Birds 24/7, and Josh breaks it all down. And Josh, I'm really interested in this week's segment because this was a tale of two halves for the Eagles defense, and really interested in what you saw as to why there was such a discrepancy. Almost 200 yards in the first half, only 45 yards given up in the second half.
Yeah, well, I'll absolutely get to your question, but first, I would just like to say that I love your aunt, and she sounds like an amazing lady. I just have to get that out of the way, first of all. Second of all...
Yeah, she's a real nice person, calling her nephew a loser.
Oh, man. All right, so with the Birds, I mean, it really was just a matter of, to a large degree, execution. I mean, the Eagles really didn't make significant adjustments from the first half to the second half in terms of scheme. Nigel Bradham, obviously, there weren't very many snaps. I'm not sure if there are any in the second half where Michael Kendricks played over Nigel Bradham in nickel situations as he did in that third touchdown drive in the first half. So I guess you could say it wasn't even an adjustment because the Eagles didn't have, the defense didn't go up against long drives in the second half. But the first half, a lot of it was they didn't set the edge against the run early on. And sometimes they're really all for different reasons. On one play, Leotis McKelvin just got sucked inside, and the running back got outside and got a first down. On another play, the offensive lineman just got away with a hold and almost tackled Connor Barwin. So there was no constant theme as to why they couldn't stop him in the first half. It was just a penalty here, a penalty there, a guy just missing his assignment, Michael Kendricks missing a tackle on 3rd and 11, which got the Lions into 4th and 1, which they obviously converted and turned into a touchdown. So it really was just a matter of a bunch of small mistakes piling up in an uncharacteristic way.
Hey, so, I mean, just listening to what you're saying here, can you surmise after watching the tape in the second half to the first half that if Nigel Bradham had more playing time in the first half, that maybe this could have been avoided? I mean, is it something that simple? Because who knew Bradham meant so much? And I guess if you want to believe that he was just part of the rotation, I think many believe he was being disciplined. But is it that easy to say that Bradham getting benched or not playing was a big difference in that game?
Yeah, I definitely think it had an impact. I mean, that third drive. Now, to preface this, I think it's understandable that, especially early in that drive, that Michael Kendrick and Steven Sullivan played in those nickel situations over Jordan Hicks, Nigel Bradham, because the Eagles had just given up back-to-back long touchdown drives. They wanted to give the guys some type of rest. They didn't want them to be run into the ground. Jim Schwartz did the same thing with a defensive line rotation. But if you had Nigel Bradham in there, I do think it would have helped. There were two key plays, I thought, on that drive. One of them was a 3rd and 11 Matthew Stafford. The Lions had the ball on their own 37-yard line, 3rd and 11. Matthew Stafford just dumped the ball off to Theo Riddick out of the backfield. And instead of maybe a 4 or 5 yard gain, Michael Kendricks misses a tackle, and Theo Riddick gets 10 yards, sets up a 4th and 1, which the Lions converted and extended the drive. Obviously, if it was 4th and 5 or 4th and 6 from their own 41-yard line, they're not going to go for that. And then later in the drive, I want to say it was 1st and goal from the 9, or maybe 2nd and goal from the 9, and Golden Tate gets a little shovel pass to Matthew Stafford going in motion. And Michael Kendricks, he has the outside leverage at the last second. He dips inside, even though he has inside help. Malcolm Jenkins is on the inside. If Michael Kendricks just stayed on the outside, they would have stopped him for maybe a 2-yard gain. Instead, Golden Tate gets around the edge, gets 8 yards, gets to the 1-yard line, which sets up a touchdown the next play. Immediately after that play, Malcolm Jenkins gets up and goes right to Michael Kendricks and starts yelling at him. So the fact that Michael Kendricks, even though it's understandable because of those long drives the Eagles just had prior to that, him being out on the field instead of Nigel Bradham definitely had an impact on the Lions scoring a touchdown on that third drive.
Josh Paunil with us talking about the Eagles and their performance after watching the defensive All-22 film. And Josh, I know that toward the end of the game, during the game, on the defensive line, Bennie Logan's a guy who, from my vantage point, it looked like he almost got a paw on the what ultimately turned out to be the game-winning field goal. Bennie Logan, what did you see from him when you looked back at the All-22?
Yeah, well, Bennie Logan, I mean, he's a guy that he had 2 quarterback hits and 2 tackles for loss. So if you just look at the box score, it's not as if you think he had a bad game. But when you watch the film, he definitely played much better than you would think after just watching the initial broadcast. I mean, there were several plays where he pressured the quarterback and he helped collapse the pocket that led to sacks or led to incompletions. I mean, there was a sequence at the end of the first quarter into the beginning of the second quarter where at the end of the first quarter, he just destroyed the left guard. He literally pushed the left guard back so quickly that the left guard fell on his butt and did a split simultaneously. That's how, I haven't seen anything like that in a long time. And then a few plays later, the Lions take out that left guard because, I don't know, I mean, maybe they say he had a minor injury or something, but I don't think it was a coincidence that after Bennie Logan manhandled him, they took him out of the game. And then against the Lions' new left guard, Bennie Logan quickly sheds him at the point of attack. Does a good job using his hands to get the lineman off of him, and he makes a tackle for loss. So he just did a lot of things that they didn't always show up in the box score and translate into statistics, but had a significant impact on the game.
And the Eagles this week, they're in a situation where Kirk Cousins has some weapons at his disposal, being able to throw the football. How did you think the defensive backs graded out against the Lions?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I was actually shocked when I went back and watched the film at how well the secondary played. Because if you just think about Matthew Stafford had 3 touchdown passes, but 2 of them were to Theo Riddick, and those screen passes, those passes to the running back, those were the Eagles linebackers really. It's not as if there was a breakdown in coverage among the defensive backs. So particularly in the second half, the secondary, particularly the corners, were superb. I thought Rodney McLeod, particularly against the run, played well, not just the second half, but the first half, especially that first drive. I want to say he had maybe 5 tackles, at least 4 in that first drive alone, including one at the goal line to keep Matthew Stafford out of the end zone, even though obviously he got in on the next play. Nolan Carroll got turned around, I want to say on the first passing play the Lions had, a 17-yard completion to Marvin Jones. But after that, later in the game, the Lions made that one play. I want to say it was to Golden Tate where that set up the game-winning field goal that had the very questionable personal foul, this their rough miscall of Malcolm Jenkins at the end, where Jalen Mills just kind of got caught up in traffic. But outside of those 2 plays, I mean, these cornerbacks and these safeties played very well, especially much better than you would think, giving up 24 points in a game.
Josh Paunil's with us, Birds 24/7 over at PhillyMag.com. Let's look over on the offense. And before we look back to last week, let's start with something this week. I'll do my best here, of course. Halapala Vaitai will start. I'll make my aunt say that. That's be your punishment for calling me a loser. You get to say that. Vaitai, Big V, as he is affectionately known by his teammates and coaches. He will start. Now, we've talked a little bit about it. It's been speculated, but I don't know how much you remember seeing him, number one, in the preseason, and number two, this week at practice, how much that's going to change not only just, a lesser player, but how that's going to change the play calling.
Good question. I think at first it's not going to change the play calling much. What it could do is maybe they'll have the tight ends or the running backs chip before they go out on their routes a little bit more, and they'll give him a little bit more help. But I really think it's going to be a matter of we're just going to let this guy, see how it goes early on, and then, as we can tell, what's he doing well, what's he not doing well. Primarily, it looks like he'll go up against Ryan Kerrigan, which obviously is a tough matchup for your first NFL game. But they're really just going to kind of wait and see how he does. They'll definitely give him help. They're going to slide the pass protection to his direction so he can get a little bit more help. But a lot of it's going to come down to we're just going to see what this guy can do, and then as the game progresses, we're just going to respond to that. And I would be surprised if you had 7-step drops and those long passing plays that take a while to develop, just because that asks a lot more from him in terms of the amount of time he has to protect Carson Wentz back there. but I don't think it should have a significant impact on the play calling. Now, the execution of it, obviously, we'll see how he does matched up against Ryan Kerrigan. But in terms of the schematics of it and the play calling, I don't think we'll see a very big difference.
All right, let's look back to last week and get some of the highlights or lowlights of that game. And I don't they didn't play poorly on offense. You just look at some of the plays in that game, specifically, Josh, that last play. The last two plays really, both resulting into turnovers. Where one, they run the ball on third down to the outside, and I wonder. The one thing about that play we don't like is you're running the ball to the outside. You're depending on like wide receivers. Jordan Matthews has to, spring you for a block. You're depending on guys who aren't your best blockers to kind of get you that yardage there. So that's one thing I didn't like about the play call on that particular play.
I understand where you're coming from, but the reason why I didn't have a problem with the play call was because the Eagles just ran the ball up the middle of the play before for a yard. The Lions were really stacking the interior of their defense, so I thought it was a good move to try to attack the outside and the edge, because that's not something that the Lions are probably anticipating. To be honest with you, I think a big part of it was Darius Slay, who forced the fumble. He just made a big play, and sometimes, good players beat good play calls. The one thing that I think would have been the best alternative, and I just think this in terms of every third and fourth and short situation, especially when you're just trying to wind the clock down. I'm a big fan of just the naked bootleg. Just have Carson Wentz make the handoff, roll him out, and you know what? If someone's coming at him, just have him slide. As long as he stays in bounds, the clock keeps coming. But I am a big fan of the play action in that situation, especially when you have a quarterback with Carson Wentz's mobility. But really, when it comes down to it, it's kind of nitpicking. I think the biggest thing is Ryan Matthews made a fundamental mistake. I mean, when you're 10 years old, your coaches are going to tell you, put the ball in your outside hand, don't carry it with your inside hand. So the biggest problem was just the execution by far.
Josh, break down the final play then where, they go deep. There's been a lot of mixed reviews this week on the show. A lot of different people that, fans mixed, most blaming Aguilar. He seems to be the guy that's getting a lot of the criticism. I didn't mind taking a shot. I mean, you haven't done that virtually the entire year. I mean, you catch them napping, that's a big play. The one thing I don't like about taking the shot is if you do score, Detroit gets the ball back with a lot of time left, but that's neither here nor there. But you're trying to catch them napping. The kid has basically been perfect all season long. So detail how that play kind of went down and how you saw it from watching it over.
Yeah, well, the play was designed, actually, even though it ended up going to Nelson Aguilar on the deep post. The play was designed. The first read was Jordan Matthews, a short crossing route. He was actually open. I mean, he could have gotten 5 or 6 easy yards. And really, it wasn't like they needed big chunk plays at the time. I want to say they had, like a minute and a half left, and they only needed maybe 30, 35 yards to get into the field goal range. So they had plenty of time. They didn't have to go get big chunk plays. So Jordan Matthews was the first read coming over the shallow middle. But the one thing I will say about that is Carson Wentz, it looks like on the film he felt some pressure on his backside. So pretty much as soon as he got the ball, he stepped back and to the right. And so Jordan Matthews was running from right to the left. So perhaps Carson Wentz felt that he couldn't make as good of a throw as he wanted with him going a little bit back into the right, with Jordan Matthews going to the left. And then the second read was actually Zach Ertz on an intermediate route over the middle of the field. But the Lions, they were in a cover one robber defense where the free safety dropped down and took that intermediate route away. And then the third read was actually Darren Sproles coming out of the backfield where, maybe he could have gotten a couple of yards. But Nelson Aguilar, he's on that deep post. And after Carson Wentz saw the Lions free safety take away that second read to Zach Ertz, his eyes immediately went to Nelson Aguilar, and he just thought he could make a play. I think the big thing is, obviously you don't want to tell your quarterback don't be aggressive, but you have to understand the situation. The Eagles were doing a very good job of consistently moving the football. They had, before that, they scored points on 5 of their 8 drives. Even though they weren't converting them into touchdowns, they didn't need a touchdown that last drive. So you didn't need to try to make a big play like that when that was going to be your last possession. So I think the situational awareness was the biggest thing. But as Doug Peterson mentioned this week, he should have just thrown it to Jordan Matthews, going shallow across the middle, which was his first read.
Josh Paunil with us, and you mentioned Nelson Aguilar's name a few times, and you even write on PhillyMag.com that some have used Aguilar as a scapegoat for Wentz's poor decision on the interception, but it looks like as you break down the all-22 on the wide receivers that you have high praise for Aguilar, even saying that he made the catch of the game.
Yeah, well, I definitely don't think – I don't want to say Nelson Aguilar played very well that game. I just think that the criticism of him is overblown. I just think people are using him as a scapegoat for that Carson Wentz interception. Would you have liked to see him make more of a play on the ball on that interception? Yes. But, I mean, he's not – it's not even close in terms of whose fault that interception was. I mean, that's the quarterback, 95%. But also, I mean, that, as you mentioned, that catch earlier in the game, I think that absolutely was the catch of the game when Nelson Aguilar, he had, I want to say, at least a step or two going over the middle against the Lions cornerback. And Carson Wentz stood a little behind and a little high, but Nelson Aguilar went up and made the catch. And those are the types of plays that you want your receivers to consistently make. And to be honest, those are plays the Eagles receivers haven't really made so far. So it's not that I think Nelson Aguilar has played well, through these first 4 games. I just think that the criticism of his play has been overblown.
How did you think the offensive line graded out in the All-22? And obviously offensive line going to be a big issue this week with Lane Johnson's suspension coming in and Big V having to step in.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think Jason Kelsey yesterday said it best. One of the biggest reasons losing Lane Johnson is going to hurt them is because Lane Johnson is playing out of his mind. He's been playing extremely well every single game, and whether it's on the run plays or pass plays, the footwork that he has in pass protection, the balance that he has, it's been very impressive. I mean, when you look at the contract the Eagles gave him, they gave him about $60 million, and he's making that contract look like, okay, maybe if he's going to play at this level, maybe they underpaid him if he's going to be the left tackle of the future and play at that level. But Alan Barber, he had a few bad snaps in pass protection in the first half against the Lions, but I thought he played really well, particularly in the run game, and stepped up in the second half. And just overall, the Eagles offensive line, I thought Jason Kelsey probably had one of his best games of the season, if not the best game of the season. He really struggled, I think, in the first 2 games, going up against those bigger 3-4 nose tackles that line up right over top of the center. But he played better against that Lions defense. And then Jason Peters, he had a snap or 2 in pass protection that weren't great, but he was still played well overall. And Brandon Brooks, he also played well overall. So this offensive line, I think, has been playing surprisingly well, especially in this run game. They were efficient every play, really opening up big holes for Darren Sproles in the middle. So that's the one good thing that, even though you have to start this rookie 5th-round pick this week against Washington, the good news is the other offensive linemen have been playing well, and really every game. As I mentioned before, Jason Kelsey had a bad start to the season, but his play has begun to pick up.
Josh Paunil's with us, Birds 24/7 over at PhillyMag.com. It's Eagles and Redskins, so that's all the stuff you learned about this team moving forward. Redskins have won 3 in a row. Philly's coming off a loss, but when you look at Philly's lost to Washington 3 straight times as well. How does the Eagles' offense match up with the Redskins' defense? Because the defense of the Redskins, last in the league, they give up 5.1 yards per carry. You would think that running the ball, but even though the Eagles have run the ball a lot, you're not going to say that they, the imbalance is there, but they haven't run the ball extremely effectively. Do they do that finally this week?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they rank right in the middle of the league in terms of efficiency on run plays. So a big reason that they've run the ball as much as they have is simply because they've gotten up so much so early in games, so they've just been running the ball a lot in those first 3 games, particularly in the fourth quarter. So that's really why you haven't seen an imbalance in between those run play calls and the pass play calls. But I think this is going to be the one week where I mentioned how I thought the offensive line was particularly good on those run plays. And I think that's going to continue this week. This Washington front seven is bad. I mean, there's no other way to say it. This Washington front seven is bad against the run. As you mentioned, they give up 5.1 yards per carry, which is, I can't believe they give up more than 5 yards per carry. And they also rank last in the NFL in rushing touchdowns allowed this season. So they're going to be prone to run the ball a little bit more because they have Big V in there, and that's one thing. His run blocking is at a higher level right now than his pass blocking. But I do think Doug Peterson may go a little heavier than normal in the run game because of not only Washington's defense, but getting Big V acclimated and getting him comfortable and confident. But that really is going to be the big thing. If the Eagles can run the ball, as I expect they will be, I think that's going to lead to a narrow victory against a division rival.
Josh Paunil with us, wrapping up Eagles and Redskins football. And Josh, one thing we didn't touch on too.
Don't bring up the kicker.
No, it's not the kicker. That is pretty funny though. I do seem to.
Although, real quick,
yeah, Caleb
Sturgis, he's been pretty darn good, man. He has been pretty good. We kid because he's in a love for the
former
kid.
TV guy turned radio host. That's why he likes to poke fun of each other.
Yeah, the kicker, the fluffy kicker question. But real quick on
wasn't going to be what I was gonna say.
No, but real quick though, Sturgis has, to be fair, he has been really good this year.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that game he had a 49-yarder, a 50-yarder. He was kicking in a dome, so that obviously helped him a little bit. But the consistency, I mean, if you asked me, just this time last year, after that, the first 2 games, he missed an extra point, short field goal. I mean, I think he missed an extra point and a short field goal, actually, against Washington. And that's a big reason they lost that game in Washington, which obviously hurt them in the division race. And there were serious questions about whether this guy would be cut after his second game as an Eagle because he was missing these easy kicks that you have to make automatically. But he's really, especially against Detroit, they could have gotten maybe they only needed probably 30 yards because of how well he was kicking on that final drive to get him in the field goal range. So Caleb Sturgis, I think, has played surprisingly well and kicked surprisingly well, especially after that bad start to his Eagles career last season in Washington.
Josh Paunil with us, and I saw your tweet earlier today, Josh, that Malcolm Jenkins had high praise for Jordan Reed. How much of a factor could that be if Jordan Reed isn't able to go for the Washington Redskins?
Yeah, I mean, it seems very, very unlikely that Jordan Reed is going to play this weekend. I mean, it would be unlikely no matter who it is, but this is his 6th concussion that he's had, so this is something that Washington will probably be very conservative with. I mean, to have a guy have that many head injuries is obviously a scary thing that you don't want to, further damage, his brain. So not having him out there, that will really help the Eagles. Malcolm Jenkins called him a top 3 tight end in the NFL, and that he's one of those guys you circle when you see the schedule. This is going to be a guy that's going to be a tough matchup for us. And the thing with Jordan Reed that he does so well, he does everything, and that's the problem is you can't just say, okay, we'll take away the quick out routes, or we'll take away those post or seam routes over the middle. He can do everything to hurt your defense. So even though Washington likes what they have, and Vernon Davis and Niles Paul, that's a pretty deep tight end group, but those 2 guys obviously aren't Jordan Reed. And Washington also does a lot of 3 tight end sets. I mean, that's something that we've talked about in Philadelphia. When are we going to see a lot of that now with Zach Ertz back? That's something Washington actually did a lot, but it looks like they won't be able to do that, at least for the short term, going forward.
All right, Josh Paunil, we'll get you out on this one because Deshaun Jackson, I know it's been 3 years, but he's been in the news. He is a free agent, so many thought he'd have a big year. He had a big week 1, but he's been quiet. He said he'd be open to coming back to Philly. But with no Jordan Reed possibly, that could be a scary proposition because that means, hey, our red zone could be a little, more difficult without our best weapon. So maybe they try to take more shots over the top with Deshaun Jackson.
Yeah, actually, I definitely agree with that. They are going to take more shots to try to take the top off the Eagles' defense. Jim Schwartz said today he expects them to take, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 shots down the field just because they have Deshaun Jackson as that outside threat. And Deshaun has been open about how he's been a little bit frustrated about the lack of touches he's had. But the thing is, even though I do think they're going to target Deshaun a lot in this game down the field, the problem is Kirk Cousins has missed him, whether it's just missing him in his reads and his progression and not seeing that he's open down the field, or just overshooting him on these throws by 5 or 10 yards. I mean, they're having the opposite problem in Washington. You know, in Philadelphia, Carson Wentz is making those throws, but Jordan Matthews or whoever is dropping the ball down the field. In Washington, Deshaun Jackson's getting open down the field, but the quarterback can't get him the ball. So that is going to be something, though, they try to incorporate Deshaun Jackson more specifically for this game than they have in the past few games.
All right, Josh Paunil breaks it all down at PhillyMag.com. And it's Eagles-Redskins, the first NFC East matchup of the year. This Sunday, the coverage starts at noon on 97.3. Josh, take care, pal.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks for having me, guys.